AITA for not inviting my brother's girlfriend to Thanksgiving after she ruined last year's dinner. Thanksgiving has always been my favorite holiday. There's something so special about the warmth of family, the smell of food wafting through the house, and the satisfaction of seeing everyone come together around a table I've spent days, sometimes weeks preparing. I've been hosting Thanksgiving for the past 7 years, and it's become a tradition that I pour my heart and soul into. My house becomes a bustling hub of activity, filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and, of course, enough food to feed a small army. Last year started out no different. I had everything planned to a T. The menu was finalized weeks in advance: turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, and my famous pumpkin pie that my dad always insists is better than any bakery's. I even made sure to have a couple of vegetarian dishes because my cousin, Sarah, had recently gone meat-free, and I wanted her to feel included. I love hosting because it's my way of showing love, and it makes me happy to see everyone enjoying themselves. About 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my brother Dan called me up to ask if he could bring his new girlfriend, Emily. Dan and I are pretty close, and I was thrilled he'd found someone he seemed excited about. Of course, I said yes. I didn't know much about Emily other than that they'd been dating for a few months and she was super into health and fitness. I even texted Dan later to ask if she had any food restrictions so I could make sure there was something she'd like. He waved me off, saying, "Don't worry about it. She eats pretty much everything." Thanksgiving morning, I was in full prep mode. My husband was helping me set the table with the good china, and I was running around the kitchen with my apron on, trying to get everything perfect. By the time the guests started arriving, the house smelled like heaven. My parents came in first, followed by my cousins, my aunt, and a couple of close family friends. Everyone was chatting, laughing, and catching up, and the atmosphere was exactly what I'd hoped for. Dan and Emily arrived about 15 minutes late, which was no big deal, but it was the first hint that something might be off. Emily was polite enough when we greeted each other, but she had this air about her like she was sizing me up. She handed me a bottle of kombucha as a host gift, which, okay, not the usual wine or flowers, but I thanked her and added it to the drinks table. Things were fine at first. We all gathered in the living room for appetizers, a cheese plate, deviled eggs, veggie platter, and some homemade bruschetta. Emily stuck to the carrot sticks and celery, which I thought was just her being health conscious. No big deal. She seemed a little quiet, but I figured she was just shy around a group of people she didn't know. Then we sat down for dinner. As soon as the food hit the table, Emily's entire demeanor shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore. She had been polite, if a little aloof, up until that point, but now she looked genuinely horrified, like I'd placed a steaming pile of garbage in front of her. Her eyes scanned the spread: turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, green bean casserole, rolls, cranberry sauce, with this mix of disgust and pity, like she couldn't believe people actually ate this kind of food. She didn't even try to hide her reaction. It was written all over her face, a dramatic wrinkle of her nose and a slight recoil, as though the smell of roasted turkey and buttered rolls was offensive. When the mashed potatoes were passed her way, she hesitated, almost reluctantly picking up the serving spoon. She stared at the fluffy, buttery pile as if it might attack her. Then, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, she said, "I can't believe people still cook with butter. It's so bad for you." Her tone was dripping with judgment, like she was delivering a public service announcement rather than making small talk at a family dinner. The room went completely silent, the kind of silence where you can almost hear people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. My dad, ever the peacemaker, tried to lighten the mood. He chuckled and said, "Well, I guess that means more for the rest of us." He looked around the table, clearly hoping someone would laugh with him, but Emily didn't even crack a smile. Instead, she set down the spoon without taking any potatoes and launched into what can only be described as a mini rant. "Do you know how bad butter is for your body?" she asked, her voice tinged with exasperation. "It's full of saturated fats, which are terrible for your heart. I'm honestly shocked that people still use it as much as they do. It's like there's no awareness about nutrition these days." I felt my stomach drop. Butter? She was giving a speech about butter, at Thanksgiving, of all times. I glanced around the table, trying to gauge everyone else's reactions. My mom looked mortified, her hand frozen mid-reach for the gravy boat. My dad just smiled tightly, but I could tell he was annoyed. My husband raised his eyebrows at me, as silent as she serious. And then my brother just sat there, looking mildly uncomfortable but not saying a word. But it didn't stop there. No, Emily had apparently decided that Thanksgiving dinner was the perfect opportunity to deliver a comprehensive critique of my cooking and, by extension, my life choices. The stuffing came next. As soon as it was passed to her, she poked at it with her fork, barely concealing her disdain. "Processed meat is basically toxic," she announced. "Do you know how much sodium and preservatives are in sausage? It's one of the worst things you can put in your body." My face was burning. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck and into my cheeks as she continued. The gravy didn't escape her judgment either. Gravy made from turkey drippings. She said with a tone that made it sound like I'd confessed to committing a crime. "That's so inflammatory. People don't realize how bad that kind of fat is for your body. It's basically like inviting heart disease to your table." Even the cranberry sauce, something I had made from scratch, wasn't safe. "There's so much sugar in this," she said, shaking her head slightly. "Sugar is basically poison. It's one of the leading causes of chronic health issues. I stopped eating it years ago." Every word felt like a slap. I had spent days preparing this meal, pouring my heart and energy into every dish, and here she was, tearing it all apart in front of everyone. I could feel the heat radiating off my skin as I forced myself to smile, gripping my fork so tightly my knuckles turned white. I glanced at Dan again, praying that he might step in, but he just stared down at his plate, not saying a word. Then came the moment that truly pushed me over the edge. Dinner was in full swing, and I was doing my best to ignore the string of comments Emily had been making throughout the meal. I thought I could just let it roll off my back, maybe chalk it up to her being nervous or socially awkward, but what happened next made it impossible to keep my cool. Without saying a word to me or anyone else at the table, Emily stood up, brushed off her napkin, and headed straight for the kitchen like she owned the place. She didn't hesitate, or even glance back to see if anyone was watching. She just walked in, opened my cabinets, and started rummaging around like it was her personal pantry. I sat there for a moment, completely stunned, before excusing myself and following her into the kitchen. My mind was racing with questions. What is she doing? Did she need something? Why wouldn't she ask? When I entered, she was standing there, head tilted as she scanned my shelves, as if she was searching for some hidden treasure. "Emily," I said, keeping my tone as light as possible despite the knot of irritation tightening in my chest. "Did you need something? I can help you find whatever you're looking for." She turned around, completely unfazed, holding a small stack of Tupperware containers she had brought with her. I blinked, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. "Before I could say anything," she said, with the casual air of someone announcing they were grabbing a second helping of dessert, "Oh, I brought my own food. I figured I'd need it." I was floored. My jaw might have literally dropped. Who does that? Bringing your own food to someone else's Thanksgiving dinner without mentioning it ahead of time. And not just bringing it, but storing it away in Tupperware containers and sneaking off to heat it up like you're at a cafeteria. My kitchen isn't a buffet. It's my home. I had spent hours preparing this meal, every dish carefully planned and cooked with love, and here she was, treating my efforts like they weren't even worth her consideration. It wasn't just disrespectful, it was downright bizarre. I watched in stunned silence as she opened my microwave, popped her food in, and set the timer. The hum of the appliance filled the room, making the tension between us even more palpable. She acted like this was the most normal thing in the world, like there was no reason I might be upset about her barging into my kitchen, disregarding everything I'd made, and microwaving her own meal without so much as a heads up. It was as if my entire Thanksgiving dinner had been rendered invisible to her. Finally, I managed to find my voice. I tried to keep it calm, though my frustration was bubbling dangerously close to the surface. "It would have been nice to know about your preferences ahead of time," I said, carefully choosing my words. "I could have made something for you or tried to accommodate." Emily didn't miss a beat. She didn't apologize, didn't seem even remotely embarrassed. Instead, she rolled her eyes in this exaggerated, almost theatrical way, like I was the one being difficult. "I didn't think I'd have to," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I assumed people were more aware of health these days." I stood there, completely speechless. More aware of health these days? Was she serious? She was acting like I had personally attacked her with a stick of butter, like my Thanksgiving table was some kind of medieval feast she'd stumbled into by mistake. There was no acknowledgement of how her actions might come across or how disrespectful it was to completely sidestep the effort I'd put into this meal. She didn't see a problem at all. She genuinely thought she was in the right. I couldn't believe the audacity. I watched as the microwave beeped, signaling that her food was ready. She casually pulled out her steaming container of organic quinoa, kale, and who knows what else, gave it a stir with the fork she'd also apparently brought with her, and smiled as if nothing had happened. My hands were clenched into fists at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. I didn't want to make a scene, not in front of my family. But in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about food. This was about respect, or, in Emily's case, the complete lack of it. By this point, I was seething, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to ruin Thanksgiving for everyone else. I plastered on a fake smile, made small talk, and got through the evening, but I was counting down the minutes until they left. After they were gone, I vented to my husband, who was just as appalled as I was. He couldn't believe how rude she'd been. This year, as Thanksgiving approached, I couldn't shake the memory of last year. The thought of Emily coming back and pulling the same stunt made my stomach churn. So, I made a decision. I wasn't going to invite her. I told Dan he was, of course, welcome, but Emily wasn't invited. When he asked why, I was honest. I told him her behavior last year was disrespectful and that I didn't want to repeat. Dan didn't take it well. He accused me of being petty and overreacting. He said Emily wasn't trying to be rude, she was just passionate about health. I told him there's a difference between being passionate and being downright disrespectful, but he wouldn't hear it. He called me selfish and said I was punishing her for having different values. Now, the family is divided. My mom is on my side. She was there last year and agrees that Emily's behavior was out of line. But some of my other relatives think I should just let it go for the sake of keeping the peace. They say it's not worth causing drama over one person, especially since Emily is obviously important to Dan. I don't know. Part of me feels guilty for potentially driving a wedge between me and my brother, but the other part of me feels justified. This isn't just about the food, it's about respect. I worked so hard to make Thanksgiving special for my family, and Emily treated it like it was beneath her. So, Reddit, am I the asshole for not inviting her? Or am I within my rights to set boundaries in my own home? Update 1. Thanksgiving was quickly approaching, and despite the stress of hosting, I had everything under control, or so I thought. The memory of last year's disaster with Emily still lingered in the back of my mind, but I was determined not to let it ruin this year's holiday. I'd made my decision clear. Emily wasn't invited. Dan was welcome, of course, but I wasn't willing to deal with the drama, disrespect, and sheer audacity she had brought to my table the previous year. The menu was finalized, the guest list was set, and I had already started prepping some of the dishes ahead of time. I was feeling good, even excited, about the day. Then, about a week before Thanksgiving, I got a text from Dan. The message popped up on my phone while I was in the middle of marinating the turkey, and at first, I smiled. Dan and I don't text often, so I figured it was something casual. Maybe him asking what time to show up or if he should bring anything. But when I opened the message, my heart sank. It read, "Got a surprise for you. Emily said she's coming to Thanksgiving this year. She's really excited, so I hope you are too." I stood there in my kitchen, completely dumbfounded. My phone sat in my hand as my mind raced. What, was he joking? There was no way he could be serious. I had explicitly told him that Emily wasn't invited this year. I had been clear, honest, and upfront about my reasons. There was no room for misunderstanding. Yet here he was, not only ignoring my boundary but acting like it was some kind of exciting news. I reread the message, hoping I'd misunderstood, but no, he was serious. Emily had decided she was coming to my Thanksgiving dinner, without an invitation, and Dan seemed thrilled about it. My stomach churned with a mix of disbelief and anger. I put down my phone, wiped my hands on a towel, and took a deep breath, trying to calm the wave of frustration washing over me. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't wrap my head around it. What kind of person invites themselves to a holiday dinner, especially after being told they weren't welcome? And Dan, my own brother, was enabling her. I thought about calling him immediately, but I knew I needed to collect my thoughts first. After all, I didn't want this to turn into an all-out fight. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about Dawn's complete disregard for my feelings and the effort I put into hosting. Did he really think it was okay to spring this on me a week before Thanksgiving? Did he really think I'd just roll over and let Emily waltz in like nothing had happened? A few hours later, when I finally felt calm enough to respond, I texted him back. I reminded him, as politely as I could, that Emily wasn't invited. I told him I'd already explained why and that my decision hadn't changed. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of relief, like I'd handled the situation maturely and everything would be fine. But then his reply came, and it was like throwing gasoline on a fire. He said Emily wanted to come because she felt bad about last year and wanted to make things right. He said I should be glad she wanted to come, that it was a good thing, because the more, the merrier. He even went so far as to suggest that it wasn't a big deal and that I was blowing the whole thing out of proportion. He kept insisting that I should let her come because she was his girlfriend and it meant a lot to her. I was livid. I could feel my blood boiling as I stared at my phone, trying to find the right words to respond. He made it sound like I was the unreasonable one, like I was the one causing drama, when in reality, all I'd done was set a boundary in my own home. And the idea that Emily was somehow doing me a favor by gracing us with her presence, it was infuriating. The nerve of Dan to frame this as a positive thing, as if Emily deciding to show up uninvited was some kind of magnanimous gesture, completely floored me. It wasn't about forgiveness or making amends, it was about control. Emily wasn't coming because she felt bad, she was coming because she didn't respect me or my rules. And Dan, whether he realized it or not, was enabling her behavior by refusing to see how out of line it was. What frustrated me the most was his refusal to acknowledge my perspective. He kept brushing it off, saying things like, "It's not a big deal, and you're making this into something it doesn't need to be," but it was a big deal. Hosting Thanksgiving is no small task. It takes time, effort, and money to pull it off, and the last thing I needed was the added stress of dealing with Emily's antics. The thought of her coming in, criticizing my food, and bringing her own Tupperware again made my skin crawl. And yet, Dan didn't seem to care. He acted like I was being dramatic, like I should just get over it for the sake of keeping the peace. But why was it always me who had to bend? Why was it always me who had to accommodate everyone else, even when they blatantly disrespected me? It felt like Dan was asking me to sacrifice my own boundaries and comfort just to make Emily happy. And the worst part, he didn't even seem to see how unfair that was. As the days went on, my frustration only grew. Every time I thought about Emily walking through my door on Thanksgiving, uninvited and unapologetic, I felt a wave of anxiety and anger. I knew I had to put my foot down, but I also knew it wasn't going to be easy. Dan clearly wasn't going to back down, and I was starting to feel like I was fighting a losing battle. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being forced into an impossible position. If I let Emily come, I'd be compromising my own boundaries and setting a precedent that her behavior was acceptable. But if I stood my ground, I risked creating a rift with my brother and potentially causing drama at the dinner table. No matter what I chose, it felt like I was the one who would end up losing. Update 2. As the days ticked closer to Thanksgiving, I had just about settled into the idea that I'd handled the situation with Dan. I had been firm but fair, I thought. Emily wasn't invited, and I had made my reasons clear. I hoped Dan would respect my boundaries, even if he didn't entirely agree with them. For a brief moment, I felt some peace about the situation until I got a message from Emily herself. It came out of nowhere, catching me completely off guard. I had barely finished arranging my grocery list when my phone buzzed with a long text from her. The tone of the message was cheery, almost overly so, and it immediately set me on edge. Emily started by saying she was so excited about Thanksgiving and that she decided to come. She went on to say she thought this year could be extra special because she wanted to help make the holiday more fun and festive. She even mentioned that I shouldn't worry about the food because she'd bring some healthy, clean dishes to balance out the meal. I stared at my phone in disbelief, reading her message over and over again. She had invited herself again. And not only that, but she had taken it upon herself to decide what my Thanksgiving needed, as if I hadn't already planned every detail. It was like she completely ignored the boundaries I'd set with Dan or assumed they didn't apply to her because, in her mind, she was bringing something valuable to the table, literally. The audacity left me speechless for a moment. I couldn't believe she thought it was appropriate to impose herself on my holiday after everything that had happened last year. The way she framed it as if her presence and her food were somehow going to fix my Thanksgiving felt patronizing and insulting. It wasn't just about the food or her previous behavior anymore. It was about the complete lack of respect for me as the host. Once I regained my composure, I typed out a reply, cutting straight to the point. I told her she wasn't invited. I tried to keep it polite, but I didn't sugarcoat it either. I reminded her that Thanksgiving was at my home, that I had already discussed this with Dan, and that the guest list was final. Her response came almost immediately, and it was clear she was stunned. She couldn't believe I was telling her she couldn't come. Her messages were filled with disbelief and confusion, like she genuinely had no idea why she wouldn't be welcome. Then came the inevitable question, why wasn't she invited? I took a deep breath before responding, trying to make sure I was being clear and calm. I told her the truth that her behavior last year had upset not just me but several members of my family. I mentioned how her comments about the food had been hurtful, how her decision to bring and eat her own meal without asking had been disrespectful, and how the overall vibe she brought to the table had made the evening uncomfortable for everyone. I didn't attack her personally, but I made it clear that her actions had consequences. Emily's response was defensive, almost predictably so. She wrote back, saying she had only been trying to help and that I simply didn't understand anything about healthy eating. She insisted that the food she brought last year was superior to the unhealthy dishes I had made and seemed genuinely baffled that I would view her actions as rude. Her tone shifted from shock to indignation, and she started lecturing me again about the importance of clean eating and how I was being unreasonable for not appreciating her efforts. That was the final straw for me. I responded one last time, reiterating that this wasn't about food, it was about respect. I told her it wasn't her place to dictate what I served at my own Thanksgiving dinner or to decide how I should run my holiday. I reminded her that being a guest means respecting the host and their home, and that, unfortunately, her actions last year had shown a lack of understanding about those basic rules. I ended by emphasizing, once again, that she was not invited and that my decision was final. After that, I stopped engaging. I didn't have the energy or the patience to keep going in circles with her. When Thanksgiving Day finally arrived, I'll admit I was a little nervous. Part of me wondered if Emily might show up uninvited, despite everything. I had even mentioned the situation to my husband, and we agreed that if she did show up, we wouldn't let her in. But thankfully, she didn't. The day went off without a hitch, and the atmosphere was light, joyful, and stress-free, exactly what I wanted it to be. Dan showed up alone, and to my surprise, he seemed completely fine. There was no tension, no lingering resentment. He greeted everyone warmly, sat down at the table, and even complimented the food. At first, I kept waiting for some awkward comment or sign of irritation, but it never came. He seemed genuinely happy to be there, and it made me wonder if, deep down, he might have been relieved to have a holiday without Emily's overbearing presence. The dinner itself was everything I'd hoped for. My dad made his usual toasts, my mom and aunt laughed so hard they were wiping tears from their eyes, and the kids who normally get restless at long family meals were too busy stuffing themselves with pie to complain. The house was filled with the kind of warmth and joy that makes all the effort of hosting worthwhile. And without Emily there to criticize or lecture, the meal was a celebration, not a debate.